The conversations and information provided are not intended to substitute professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment.
The opinions expressed are the speaker's own and do not reflect the view of Humana Military or the Department of Defense.
Welcome to the Operation Within podcast, where we talk about health and a deeper sense of well-being.
Operation Within is a collective initiative to optimize holistic health matters and nourish within community, within self, and within family.
Thank you for joining the conversation on Operation Within podcast. We are your hosts, Mel
and Marty, and our conversations are real, they're raw, and reflective.
These conversations offer meaningful dialogue on experiences within the military community, oriented to empower and strengthen health and vitality in our communities who serve.
We want to give a special thanks to Humana Military and our partners who have brought Operation Within to life.
Let's dive in. Hey, welcome back to the Operation Within podcast. It's Mel here, and I'm so excited and honored to have Nigel Fisher here with us. He has served 20 years active duty in the Marine Corps and 6.5 years as an independent contractor overseas with the U.S. government. He was part of the implementation of preservation of the force and families within MARSOC, which helped bring resilience in operations, peak, and performance. Nigel, we're so excited to have you.
Super happy to be here today. Thank you so much. It's definitely an honor to be able to come and have a great conversation today and see how we can be a positive influence to everyone listening.
I totally agree and would love for you, if you can, share a little bit more about your background.
Yeah, absolutely. So, spent 20 years on active duty as a Marine, tons of different experiences during that time, but I think those that are relevant today include some of the trauma I sustained on active duty. I was wounded in combat in 2007 in Iraq, and just the support apparatus that was around me as I recovered from my injuries. And then also, as you spoke about, the preservation of the force and families, really cool opportunity that I got to help implement that program within MARSOC in 2010. So definitely some unique stuff that we can get into today. But additionally, I know when we talk about mental programming and the whole being of who we are as humans, there's a lot that goes into that, and definitely spent time influencing people in positive ways around the globe and using information to do that, break down some of the paradigms that we get used to as human beings, where there's this preconditioned environment that we believe is absolute, and that's really not.
Absolutely. It's like, the concept of reality can get so dynamic and there's so many layers to it. And this has such an effect on mental health. And I'm curious to know a little bit more about preservation of the force and families, if you can share more about that.
Absolutely. So during the time that we were implementing this early on, relatively in what has become quite a few great resources structured within the military to help ensure that both service members and their families have the ability to sustain peak performance over the long term and actually be resilient. We ask a lot of service members and their families, and for so long, there just weren't dedicated resources in the way that we have now.
Yeah.
Preservation of the force and families was early on implemented by U.S. Special Operations Command, and it was aimed at achieving peak performance and then being able to sustain that. So how did we do that? It was all about the whole human. So mind, body, and spirit, and just really tapping into ways that people thought of as kind of out there concepts.
I'm sure back then, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, when you've got a bunch of special operations Marines doing, sorts of, I guess, yoga type adaptations, a little uncomfortable at first. Like, why are we doing this? We should be out like lifting heavy weights or running long distance with heavy things on our back or something. But definitely a great time to decompress that we used after deployments, where we would go in and sit down and examine the physical being, examine the mental being, and then have time for reflection prior to transitioning from this crazy, chaotic combat environment, and then overnight being thrust back into what we would call kind of quote unquote normal society, right?
Yeah.
That's a very abrupt transition to just overnight be in two such different environments.
Well, I think that the wisdom of this is acknowledging the nervous system and its need to recover. And we're seeing today the military is really taking on this. I feel like, the preservation of the force and the families was a big beginning for seeing that this need for recovery and regulation was so necessary to enhance performance. And as we talk about mental programming today and the impact of our belief of reality and our beliefs and our thoughts, things like yoga, and you guys know I'm, that's what I do and that's what I facilitate. And part of this is because when people reconnect back to the recovery aspect of their body, the mind does free up and it clears up and you're able to respond versus being so reactive. And I'm sure that was something that, I'm not sure how they articulated it to you guys. I'm sure it was like, what is this? But, you think of the warrior spirit of, intent. Like I think of the art of war. And there's so much of this like quiet wisdom. And these practices really do embody that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, initially as we adventured into this, it was challenging to help everyone understand how valuable this time spent on just generally being mindful would be. A lot of people in very intense operational communities like that, they will practice and rehearse the same thing over and over and over to generate a perfect result. And much of that is physical and timing and endurance. And then we would forget to think about taking care of our brains and our emotions along the way. And so it was interesting trying to generate an understanding that we need to be intentional about taking care of those other aspects of our body, things like great sleep. Anyone who's served in the military or been a military service member's family member understands that that's kind of like the last priority. It's like we always forget to sleep because we're just go, 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 go. And so it all starts there. I mean, if we're not well rested, how can we achieve peak performance repeatedly? We can do it maybe a few times, but it's not durable, definitely not for the long term.
Well, one thing I find too is working with the AIT schools, there's this moral injury that happens where it's like we know we need to improve sleep, or when it comes to pre-deployment training or, preparing for an operation, that this stuff can be more effective, but you need to learn how to utilize your time. But the problem is how do you, if you don't have time for sleep, that's going to impact part of the access to it. But another element of it, what I love about mindfulness is that these techniques of self-reflection, of witnessing and welcoming presence, and from yoga practice, these things also have really restorative benefits for the brain. So one thing that I teach with the drill sergeants is, because the Army has come out with H2F, which is almost kind of a later byproduct of what you guys were doing. And there's all this stuff about sleep hygiene. And the most common thing I'm hearing, like no one really wants to talk about it. It's because they don't see the practical. How do we sit here and tell people and advocate for healthy sleep when then we're like waking them up at 3 a.m. and, the schedules just don't work and coincide with one another. But there are ways to, like you said, with this patterning and this training of activating that recovery aspect of our nervous system. And, we look at in the military movement lethality, and it's this concept of that repetition and that training. But the invitation that H2F and these conversations, even that Nigel and I are having right now, is how do we create this resiliency training, right? This regulation training along with movement and effectiveness, the trainings that we do for that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the basic idea I think that is so great about this podcast that we're doing today is the fact that this is that overt message that these things are important, that our leaders have ensured that we are going to expose people to a different message than what they've heard in the past. This repetitive theme of self-sacrifice endlessly, yes, that still occurs, but in a much healthier way now. And having these types of resources to reflect upon is just that great endorsement that, hey, we understand. We know that we ask a lot, and it shouldn't be something that's asked that burns you out overnight. So here we are. We get to talk about it now, and it's like not this foreign, weird thing, and it's started to become a natural part of what we do in the military and the resources available to our families as well.
Well, it's definitely the way ahead, but you still see a lot of hesitation around this. And this is a perfect segue to dive into that mental programming, because I'll use an example. So as a meditation teacher, when I'm introducing the concepts of meditation and helping people connect with ways that meditation, or like, for example, like fishing can become meditation. For some people, sitting with and listening to music is meditation. For some, riding horses can be meditative. And the concept of, wait a second, just being, how is that productive? Part of the reason we don't see it as productive is because there's been this story that if you're not doing something, you're lazy, just think about the narratives that pop in your head that if you're just chilling or you're not doing something, that what does that make you, right? I'm not contributing. So there's this guilt, I think, an energetic guilt or an underlying guilt that arises of, wait, so I'm going to just sit here and breathe and listen to music. This is not productive. How can this help me? It's a program, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we get so conditioned by the world, by society, that everything has to be 24/7 nonstop planning and preparing and looking forward to the next thing, that we forget to take that time to recharge. And being mindful will actually help us have a clearer head when we get back to that next programmed phase of getting on with our lives, if you will. So it's, how do we step away and take that time knowing that that's the healthiest thing for us, and clear our minds of all these plans and preparations, whether it's what are we going to do next week? When are we going to go on the next vacation? What's my next promotion at work? Whatever this next thing is how do we clear our mind of those thoughts and really just focus on, this is my time to recharge. I've dedicated this time. I have protected it, and this is my time for nothing but having this moment. So it's something that I think all of us can do better at. I do it quite a bit, but I have to schedule it, if you will. It's like planned time to take for myself in order to be very intentional about recharging.
Well, and going back to the patterning and the practice of it, right? Like, I think that a lot of people like yourself, like I schedule it out, or I'm really intentional. And when people are just beginning, they might say, well, it's still like, it's that belief they might start. And then the thought is I'm not good at this. And then we disassociate and we don't want to do it. So learning that, like meeting yourself where you're at. And part of this going into, when you think about the concept of recovery, or even just your mindset and beliefs, I always call it the bounce back thought. Like, it's the bounce back thought. That's how you know what your judge is. Because usually it's like, oh, I need to make space for this thing I love that lights me up, or I'm going to take my time this morning, or I could check emails and do all this other stuff, right? That bounce back voice that judges it, that's where the programs live, right? Or these things we've adopted and subscribed to that really aren't us.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that program in our brain is code that's been written over so many years, and everyone has a different set of life experiences that have written that code. So when we take a look at that bounce back thought, or that judgment that exists as the silent voice in our brains of, oh, but I can't do that because. That is something that has come about over a very long period of time. So for those people that they take that first step and they go, no, I'm actually going to be very intentional about this, and then they have that feeling of, I didn't do a great job. That's perfectly natural. And I think for anyone listening that says, but how do I get past that? It's through repetition and practice. We don't get good at things overnight. And when we've had an endless message our entire lives telling us to do other things, you're going to have to take some time to get past that. And no matter how long you do it for, there will probably be moments where you have that same sensation again, or that same voice in your head. I should be doing something else, or I wasn't good at that.
Or this is weird.
Yeah, it's kind of weird too, right? Like, especially how many of us have been in quiet places recently and had time very much alone with our own thoughts, where there's no cell phones, there's no music, there's nothing other than sounds of nature and us by ourselves. And that's a really great place to be, but it can be extremely uncomfortable for people that are so used to having those instant notifications on their phone like nonstop every day.
Those are the things that, going again with this programming, if we can recognize that the fact that we always have our phone and these constant notifications, there is always something to react to. And then that trains us that if we don't have something to react to, then something's wrong. And then we might create a drama, we might create a narrative, or just continue distracting ourselves from the present moment because of that pattern, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's like, but what if I miss something important? And the great news is it will still be there.
Yeah, no, for sure.
There's probably not that many things happening in the world that are instantly going to turn your entire life upside down if you take 20 to 30 minutes to just spend time with yourself. So how do we get to that place? How do we push away and understand that I actually control all of these inputs? I've got complete control. And it was funny, before we started today, we were discussing the do not disturb function on our phones. And it's like, how many people actually know where to locate that? Because they're just so used to needing to be connected all the time. And how do we get to that place where we disconnect? And it starts with one simple step. It's recognizing that I'm not going to allow this to be my reality. And I need to be very focused on controlling the inputs that are coming into my life. It's one of those you are what you eat kind of things.
Yeah.
We've heard that phrase, pretty common. Most people have heard that. Well, your brain is what it eats too. And not in the sense of actual nutrition, but all of those inputs, that mental programming that all of us, each one of us allows to occur each and every day. It's how do I choose to surround myself with things? If I choose to constantly be bombarded, I am intentionally allowing this opportunity for these things to program my brain that they are more important.
Or that this is truth, or that something's wrong with me because I'm not like this, or whatever it is. And I love your first step, because I think that's the process of reframe, and that the pattern that we're creating is our ability to see the judgmental thought and then reframe it and renegotiate. And I talk about this with like narrative psychology. A lot of it is you can't just get to a place of peace and serenity and equanimity within yourself until you meet yourself where you're at. You have to be honest about the bombarding thoughts or the things that you notice, and unpacking it and going, wait a second, where did this come from? Where did I first hear that? Why do I think that even though I don't feel that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, that's one of those interesting aspects of all of this is we come to believe some of these thoughts that we're bombarded with from people and things that we don't even necessarily truly like or respect. For a society that is so focused on individuality and everyone being able to be their own person, it's interesting that we oftentimes feel our own worth is generated by how many likes we got on Instagram or something.
Yeah, or approval. It's like this concept of, unity. Like unity is different things coming together, right? Unique different things. Conformity is the same thing coming together. And I think we get that confused where in the story, whatever it be, like I love the example Instagram, if everybody's trying to create this influencer lifestyle or this influencer, and this goes out to probably, people who are entrepreneurs and trying to build something on social media, to our younger generations, that it's like, I want to be an influencer when I grow up, right? And then you're trying to model after these people who don't know you, don't care about you. It's like this big question of what I love that with the brain, like the brain is what it thinks, because you're digesting you're consuming that, and then we learn to, or we lose our ability to know the difference of who I am and like where my energy is and where their energy is. Like, who am I? Where do I end and where do they begin? Right? It's that knowing yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm very conscious of what my brain eats. There are certain types of shows I just won't watch because I find myself, if it's disturbing thoughts contained in a television show, I find my mood just being totally different after watching that. And I'm aware of that. And I just go, why am I going to watch that? Because now I was in a great mood. I wanted to watch something entertaining and good. And I come away feeling worse. Like that doesn't do me any good. So I've realized that my appetite for those things has really waned over time. And I think that it's something that we aren't always conscious of. But maybe people hearing this will reflect on that. And the next time they see something and they get that feeling afterwards, they'll go, no, you know what? I really don't need that as much as I thought I did. Maybe it's not as entertaining as I believed. Why did I believe that? Oh, because I saw a million different postings on Instagram about how amazing this was. But how do I feel about it individually as a person? Not am I going to absorb that collective thinking about whether this is good for me or not.
Well, I love that you're talking about feeling, because feelings are really our antenna. Like, it's what we're picking up on. And there is a difference between thoughts and feelings. You know, a big piece of my work is about embodiment. And what that means is how can you be in your body and feel your body and listen to what's going on in your body? So I can have a thought and it can bully me to want to do something. It's like, no, it'll be better. I will, whatever. I might have all these stories of why I should do it, but my gut and my heart is like, I don't know. Like, it doesn't feel right. And I think you ask anybody, whenever you betray your gut feelings, usually you learn a lesson, right? But we do this self-betrayal all the time. And part of this, I think it happens for a lot of people because we're disconnected from our feelings. We're disconnected from our bodies. And this, going back to the programming, I'm curious, and even kind of thinking from military culture, right, of the condition of like drive on, to disassociate from our feelings, to just get through it and then we'll deal with it, but we never really deal with it.
Yeah, and that's tough, right? Because at what point do we decide to make time for dealing with it? Because that voice is saying, just carry on, carry on. And particularly for service members, they know that is their duty. That is their job. That's what they signed up to do. But it's okay to take a moment, and very admirable and brave to step back for just a moment and say, I'm not okay. And it's okay to say you're not okay. I really would have liked to have heard that in my career before I spent different moments of just pushing through pain or pushing through lack of sleep. And I definitely would have performed at a higher level. And so now it's something I've had to reprogram myself, because I still have that inside of me after, more than 2 decades of serving in very demanding environments. And now I go, why? Why do I need to push through this? Why am I doing this to myself? And I find myself more and more taking a step back and going, you know what? What's the cause of this, achy knee? There's no war that I'm charging off to fight tomorrow morning. Maybe I should take a look. And maybe it's something as simple as, that's weird. I've just been sleeping kind of funny. Or I notice I've been sitting a lot lately and I haven't been getting the same type of exercise that I know keeps this joint healthy. And just reflecting on that and realizing there's no thing that is compelling me to drive through this. Can I still get up in the morning and get out of bed? Absolutely. So I'm pretty much good right there. It's how do I get to a place where I'm able to do the things I want to do? My wife and I are getting ready to go on a skiing trip, our annual ski trip. And so that's one of my focus areas is my knee. Is like, okay, I need to be very intentional about the type of fitness that I'm doing now, to ensure that this joint is ready for that specific type of event, because I enjoy it so much. It's easier to make the time and say, hey, I'm dedicated to this, when on the daily basis, it's not really that important because I can still get around. So I kind of push it off.
Well, and I think a lot of people will tend to feel something. It's like, let's just take something to make it go away and overlook it. But the cost of that later versus just the present moment discipline of awareness. And that's what really, when we talk about mindfulness, that's all it is. It's just self-awareness. It's witnessing things about yourself and noticing, hey, I have this pain somewhere. What is it telling me? Maybe it's to slow down. And the question of like, how do you know for sure what it's telling you? Well, what do you feel it's telling you? And oftentimes it's the honest stuff, like the example of I need to slow down can be really terrorizing. And if you ask yourself, why does slowing down make me feel uncomfortable? Maybe it was someone once told you that if you slow down, you're lazy, or if you slow down, you're not a good soldier. If you slow down, so it's like that unpacking. And I want to ask you, in your experience that aided you to arrive to this knowledge and this understanding today, is there an experience or a story where it kind of came to you of like, wow, I need to start doing reflection. I need to start exploring my own thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think a lot of different experiences really, but we'd be here all day talking about war stories and that sort of thing, which, really isn't our purpose, right? But one particular event was when I was wounded in Iraq. And it was really a time that I struggled with having a physical limitation while I was recovering after I had to have surgery to reattach the bicep tendon in my shoulder. And during that time, I really had to focus my energy on things that made me feel good, that I was capable of doing, because I started to get into kind of like this mild depressive state. I mean, what active duty Marine that's, their entire purpose is war fighting, and then now they can't even go for a jog. And it's that lack of self-worth that had been programmed into me of your utility is only when you are not broken. So now that I'm broken, what do I do? And so I realized kind of during that time, I think primarily was I need to understand myself better about what do I do when I'm not functioning at my best? How can I bring about just positive feelings for myself? And it took a little bit to get through that, because even just admitting I feel broken and I feel like this could be permanent and I'm never going to be useful to the Marine Corps again, which I ended up being useful for, more than a decade after that, right? But like it just was a lot to take in mentally and emotionally, because I didn't want to admit that maybe there was something wrong with me. When most people outside are looking in, they're like, hey man, you just had to have surgery because you got blown up in a war. Like, it's okay. But it was the voice inside my head, that programming that had been created over time, that I had to find a way to change that voice. And so, yeah, it took a lot. And I spent a lot of time outdoors, not just in the immediate aftermath, but more and more in my remaining time in the Marine Corps. That was where I found my solace, was when I could tune out the noise of life and start that reprogramming for myself. Things like riding my dirt bike, kind of noisy, right? But in that moment, I couldn't hear anything else. I didn't have to hear people talking. There was nothing else around me out in the middle of the desert, just going crazy, right? And it was such a freeing time. And I went, man, this is so good, because I really don't have to think about anything other than, making sure I'm not crashing this dirt bike, right? But that was like really good, intense, positive energy and focus for me.
It makes me think of, I had a conversation with a veteran a few years ago who was really into diving. And the reason he loved diving, he was like, this might sound kind of weird, but when I'm at the very bottom, like when I can touch the bottom and just stay there, it is like the most amazing, quiet, like there's nothing you feel but your own body movements. And it is true, like there are these things, like you don't have to just sit and journal for it to qualify as mindfulness, or these like things to regulate yourself. I love that you acknowledge, like when I was out in nature, I found solace, right? Like, what are the things that bring that to you? And for soldiers, this concept, like this experience you just shared, the concept around being broke, I think is a universal fear. So what happens is a lot of soldiers will try to minimize their injuries or bypass a pain because they don't want to risk it affecting their career or being considered broke. And, I love your story around that, because that is, again, an example of this programming, like someone saying that if you can't do this, that you're broke. Well, there's a lot of really awesome MOSs or things or more to come. And it's that fear is not coming from truth necessary. It's because there's actually a concept called that rejection is protection, right? Or so if you get stopped in somewhere in your career and redirected, it's a protection aspect, or it's your path. And we resist that so much because we have been taught that my mind is always right. We got to always be its control, right? Our own control for safety, which then robs us of possibility.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, some of the most amazing things that have happened to me have come from those redirects in life that I was so upset about in the moment, because I was like, that's not my plan, right? Like,
Yeah.
I have this plan. I've spent my whole life working for this moment, and now it's been robbed from me. And, just this sense of being victimized, right? And then coming to realize that fork in the road, that I really didn't have a choice, that pushed me in a different direction, was really my purpose. And it was something so much better than what I had created in my mind of what was ideal. And it goes back again to that programming, right? Like we have these ideals that are set out for us that we get influenced by, whether it's teachers in school or, leaders in the military that are like, you must follow this exact path.
Yeah.
But come to find out, all hope is not lost. It's amazing. And you end up in this great place if you're just open to it. It's being open to the potential that something other than this infinite wisdom that we all think we possess, and this path that we just have created could be something even better. And when you run into those circumstances and are open to them, it is so fulfilling, because it's like a surprise, a gift that you get that you could have never even fathomed would be present in your life.
It's so true. And I think when you start reframing this concept, like witnessing your own control tendencies to learning to collaborate with your path in life, that we are co-creative with our path and we do have a choice. Like, you can resist it. And sometimes the more you resist, usually it will persist and it gets harder and harder, and you keep having to relearn the lesson until you finally learn it. Or you can collaborate with the discomfort and trust where it's going to take you. And trust, we have been told that trust is often built by proof of seeing evidence. But another aspect of trust is it comes from the self-agency. Like, when you know that you have choice, then a lot of our fears, is it because we just don't trust ourselves? And I know that before we started recording, you were talking about self-agency, self-efficacy. I'd love for you to share a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I really like this one because I think it speaks to kind of a larger aspect of what we're talking about. And that is, a lot of people think, oh yeah, like, I am in charge of my life. I control everything that happens. But oftentimes, unfortunately, that's in a self-efficacy kind of way, in the sense that for people that aren't familiar in between self-efficacy and self-agency, is the self-efficacy portion is that portion that has been a created reality around us. And I think you called it the meality. I really like that because, there's this thing inside of our head where we only believe things can exist in a certain plane or a certain realm because of our programming. And it's a false reality. And that doesn't mean it's bad. It just means it's not the full extent of what is truly possible. And self-agency being, there's the true reality. So, if I tell myself, because I've been told that, someone in his mid-40s can never do something like swim across, a channel, or, learn to scuba dive or skydive or something like that. If this is something, that I've never done, I might believe that that's true. But the reality is, I could very easily go and look through my phone and Google and find a place that will teach me that for a, probably hefty sum, but like, I can schedule that up tomorrow and go out and try to do those things. And it's just a matter of, is there that message that I believe is reality versus what's truly possible out there? So something that I think when people take a look at that and they step back, they'll go, you know what, maybe there is more that's possible out there, and I just have never explored it before.
I always say that actions are the witness to your belief. And one of the biggest challenges, people will say, well, of course I believe in myself, or I'm positive, but they're still running into this hamster wheel circle of it's not getting better. And part of it is reflecting on your actions. I loved how you said it's just Google, just look up and see if you can train in it, or if you want to see, if you believe in yourself or you're curious if you can experience something, it's a matter of your action matching that belief, because that's how it manifests into your reality. And when we were talking about reality versus meality, every human, and we really got to see this over the past 2 years, is that every human experiences their own reality, because, at this house, people were responding in this way, and then down the road, it was completely opposite. And that every human does have this agency of creating what they want to see in the world. I think of, because I am a college dropout, I created my own business. I went into specialization schools, and, I've created a great business, and I'm so grateful for my career and the work I get to do and the things I get to be part of. But, I reflect back to being in high school and always being I remember being a freshman in high school, and it's where do you want to go to college? Okay, well, start thinking about the one thing you want to do for the rest of your life. And so many people, I think, also join the military because, you're 17 years old, 18 years old. How are you supposed to know what you're going to do for the rest of your life? That is the heaviest question that you can put on a young individual, especially who hardly knows themselves, right? Because there's so much of a social recognition through high school of you're learning who you are. And most of us would say we are completely opposite and different than we were in high school now. So putting this narrative that your whole life is dependent on this decision of you going to a university or making this choice, and that if you don't, then your life is going to go in shambles. And I did go to university, and it was not for me at all. And stepping away from it, I remember everybody and also I was marrying my husband. I was 19 years old. People were like, oh, no, this is going to end bad. I know I'm grateful for my parents just that supported, but they were just what are you doing with your life? And that's part of that programming, right? But if I didn't take that step, my heart 100% was I want to be with my husband. I'm going to figure this out. I want to teach yoga. I mean, it's funny because here we are over 10 years later, and I do teach yoga for the military. But back then I was I want to teach yoga for the military. And it's I don't know how I'm going to make money, but we're just going to see what happens. That self-trust, I'm grateful I had that in myself, but I see so many young people get paralyzed. And even looking, again, I work with AIT students, right? So these young kids coming in, or people kind of in their late 20s, trying to figure out their life. And so many people, it's a wall you hit of is this belief that, okay, this is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. That's such a program. It might be their reality, but you get to choose what your reality is.
Yeah, absolutely. I think choosing your own reality, it's kind of like a book that I used to read when I was a kid, Choose Your Own Adventure, right? Now you get to make a choice. If yes, then turn to this page. If no, then turn to this page. But I think there is a major aspect or component of life that we should probably all try to do more of that. And it comes down to not defining our success by those programs, that code that's been written for us over the longest period of time, that feeling that you had of, wow, I'm dropping out. Or was it that you were just choosing that wasn't the direction that you were happy going?
Well, one of the few times in my life when I considered joining the military was I had a plan that when I moved to Fort Bragg, I was going to work for this yoga studio. And long story short, ended up not getting the position. And I was in my car crying. I think I called my dad. I was like, I'm just going to join the military. Because at that point, I've dropped out of college. I thought I was going to be teaching at the studio. And, it was like, get yourself together. Don't just jump in and join the military. Like, just take some time. And I ended up going on Craigslist and found a business partner that we opened a studio in Fayetteville, and it was the most magical experience. So it's like that feeling of like this belief of success. And we all know that just because you have money or just because you have these things doesn't equivalent to contentment.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have seen so many people that have a ton of money, and they are the most unhappy people I've ever met. Not to say that there aren't happy people with a lot of money, but just to say that we put value on that in society, that if you have a lot of money, you must be happy.
Or successful, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like, that doesn't mean you're successful. I mean, you could look around and have a ton of debt, even though you have a lot of money. And does that equal success? I don't know. It's different for everybody. But I like your story about being at Fort Bragg and feeling initial sense of maybe that was the only direction you had to go, because I just don't know what else I can do to be successful. But you had a desire to not just go down that path because it was kind of a societal option, if you will, or a pre-created option for you. It was, oh, I really want to do something different. Let me give this a shot. And it ended up being hugely successful, right? So it's when we have that desire to go a particular direction, I may need to do something like take a job that maybe isn't my ideal as a means to an end as I pursue that longer term outcome, which is what will truly make me happy. It's taking a look at having enough desire to break free from those norms that have been created for us where, well, if you're unable to do this, you're unable to finish going to college, then, well, I guess you're just going to have to take X type of job instead of, here you are. I mean, how many businesses have you owned now, and like successful every time. And, all of those things come from that desire, that drive, that ability to think outside of that reality or that program of society.
It's so true. And especially when you start to take that inquiry and you start to recognize what isn't you and what is you, and starting to say no, because boundaries around this, like earlier when you said that I don't watch these shows because they make me feel a certain way. When we start to establish boundaries on things that we're not going to tolerate in our, field, in our life, in our mind, then all of a sudden you will start to create more space and room for the things that do align with you, that resonate with what you're interested in. And I believe like that example with the Craigslist thing, to this day we laugh about that because I'm still good friends with her. Just like so random. And she was kind of like, I don't know, I'm just going to put this out there. And that's how magic happens. It's never planned, even though we're told that you have to have all this planning and all this stuff squared away.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when I take a look at life, there was a point in time where I believed in this concept of coincidence. But I find more and more in life, I really don't believe that anything happens by coincidence. It happens because we're open to it. The most serendipitous things that maybe we otherwise would miss in life, and we believe they're coincidence, it's because that wavelength that we're operating on, we're actually open to the possibility that this can actually occur. It could be the most fantastic or fanciful thing, according to most people, that reality that's been programmed for us. But the true reality is these things can and do happen every day to people. Me meeting my wife, that was something that seems so ridiculously impossible, and to meet so unexpectedly and to have the relationship that we have, like that came out of nowhere. I had given up that I believed that a relationship like that was even possible because of everything I saw around me, divorces and just bad relationships and there's no way that you can meet someone at this stage of your life. You'll never be happy.
Right.
And then there it was. And it was almost like unbelievable. And truly it still is. It's like every day I'm just blown away. I'm like, how did this happen to me? Like it's a true blessing.
I love that. And it's like part of this too is if we empower our disempowerment, we miss those opportunities. Because if I believe that it's impossible, like let's say every relationship fails, then I will never even step into the space to open myself to another person. And then I miss these opportunities. And I mean, even just, I think for military spouses, for example, with creating your own business. And this is, just speaking from my experience of, if I believe that, well, it's impossible because we move around, and like I can list you, and trust me, I've complained about it. The odds that are against the ability to do this. And when you believe that is you're going to receive proof of that. So what you believe, you also receive proof of. But if you notice, like, let's say you meet someone and you're like, well, it's never possible. They're probably going to cheat on me, right? And then you just believe that. Well, witness that thought. Why do you think that? Where did that thought come from? And if you unpack it, it allows you to heal it. It might invite some healing in so you can show up and enjoy the present moment and be with whatever flows into your path. And who knows, it could be something magical like what you described.
Yeah, those things definitely come out of nowhere when we're open to them. And it's creating that own reality for ourselves. And not that I can influence or create someone else's feelings towards me, but if I'm not at least open to the possibility that they're in the same place that I am, then it's not a reality. And that's something because I closed that wall. I closed it off because I just couldn't believe it, which I didn't do, and I'm so thankful that I didn't. But so many aspects of life, whether it's relationships or opportunities, the ability to be successful in our own minds, truly be happy and healthy in where we are as people, is taking that first step of understanding that maybe we should take a step back and evaluate where our information has come from for so long in our own minds and go, is this the reality that I want to live in?
It's so true. Like, was it paid? Was there, like, where did it come from? And this is really big too with the self-accountability piece, because I think that we condition in our society that it's easy to point fingers or play victim in our experiences. And absolutely, there are things that happen to people that are so unfair and it was so unjust, and like 1,000%. And there's this victimhood though, that if we stay in that, and we stay in those thought forms and those beliefs, the world around us shows us proof of that. There's a quote by Einstein that says, you can either choose to live in a friendly world or a hostile environment. And I love that because he's like the father of quantum in so many ways, and talks so much about how we fabricate our own realities, right? Like I can interpret, and the way I interpret something is based on my own experiences. But if I stay in a pattern of believing I can't, and I'm not good enough, or bad things always happen to me, then I will never access the things that my heart's asking for. So this accountability to our own healing, the accountability to ourself, is something that is very contrary to a lot of our conditioning in our culture. Just like sitting still and like exploring your feeling, like that's so counter to what we've been programmed and conditioned in our society. But what does it, like, just one time, one little moment with it, and it doesn't have to be this big end goal. It's just in the moment, notice, like, wait a second, maybe I'm like pushing on a story on someone, or maybe I'm repeating what a parent said to me or what a teacher once said.
Yeah, and being good to people is one of the best ways that we can open ourselves to a different reality. And what do I mean by that? It is simply being aware of what message am I sending to other people, and then I'll start to be even more aware of what message I'm receiving from people or advertisements. So what I'm saying to a person right now, is that useful, or is that just an opinion that I share? So when I see someone, I go into a convenience store. Hey, how are you today? People ask that question a million times a day, but how often do they really listen to the answer or like have anything meaningful to say after that? And if anyone has never tried this before, if you actually observe like the body language of someone that's asked that question and you give them a real response when they ask you, how are you today? My day's going a little bit rough. How are you doing? And then they go, well, I worked a double shift. Oh man, I'm really sorry to hear that. Well, thank you so much for being here. Cause I know I don't know what I would have done without you. Cause I didn't get a chance to pay for my gas. I know it seems simple, but thanks so much for being here for me. And people just like, it's so different from what they're used to. Hey, yeah, man, thanks. And then we just move on our way. It's this very momentary transaction, but we can make it so much more meaningful, and realizing that a few words can really have a lot of power. And when you see that response, when someone lights up because they truly feel seen, then you go, wow, like that was a positive message and that person heard me. And so what am I doing in the rest of my life where maybe I'm not hearing what's actually being communicated? Because that person, probably 1,000 times a day, someone's like, hey, how you doing? And then it's just
like next person. And it's draining. Whereas somebody who comes in and you actually acknowledge and have a conversation, it makes such a big difference. And it really is something that was so natural that, like relationships so much have become transactional, right? And this is part of the power of mindfulness and self-reflection is if you want quality of life is found by being in the present moment and being in community with people and connecting with people and laughing and crying and like, resonating with one another and our humanness.
I think we all know that feeling of when we have a conversation with someone where it's just a really good conversation. And those conversations are oftentimes rare when we just kind of let thoughts flow and, you feel connected to the other person because you're like, wow, like that's a really great point that you just made. And that reminds me of this. And then the conversation flows and you just go, it's because I was open to the conversation. It wasn't transactional. It's because I took the time to actually listen to what was being said. And then that spurred all these great thoughts that then became valued by the other person as well. Cause there's that collaboration and thinking and sharing of ideas and exploring realities,
Yes.
So it's a really neat experience when we have that feeling. What if every interaction that we had were like that in some way? And I think that's the small example of, someone at a convenience store or wherever it is, very momentary. We're not going to stand there and talk to them for an hour and a half because I do genuinely have priorities of things I need to get done today. But I can take 1 minute to extend that kindness and bring about that same feeling. And think about how amazing that would be if everyone just took 1 moment in each of those interactions and were able to generate that same sensation, that same feeling, even if momentary. Think about the happiness, the joy, like the fulfillment that people would feel in life to just feel good about things that they already need to do every day that are otherwise meaningless or irrelevant. They're background noise in their lives, paying for gasoline or something. Yes, that function is critical for me to get back and forth to work every day. But does that moment when I talk to that person have to be meaningless? No, it can absolutely have meaning.
And it's just total reframe. It's just reframing the simple things you do. I think about with these practices of self-inquiry and just reflection, when there's a lot of time we sit and we distract our minds where we could be connecting with, whether it's a person, maybe, calling grandma, right? Or connecting with someone during that time to build those relationships. Because as humans, we co-regulate with one another. And I love what you said. It's like we co-create as well and impact one another's realities. And part of that is so huge for changing the world. And people are really struggling these days with mental health and isolation, and how just that one conversation can really inspire or elicit something in someone that, might awaken them into something different or a new reframe.
And that's a great place to be, is when someone has an unintentional positive consequence in someone else's life.
Yeah.
And that's the power of what one moment can bring, is someone might be having the worst day. They're in a really bad place, and maybe I don't even know it, but by just being generally good-natured towards people, maybe you have that opportunity to turn their day around. Like, that could have just changed their mind about people in the world. Like,
yeah,
man, people are just so busy all the time. And then that one person stops to say, hey, how are you today? And it's like, oh, I am seen. I am recognized. And maybe today isn't so bad. And then that unlocks some more positive thoughts. If we focus on negative thoughts, they linger and they create more negative thoughts. If we focus on positive thoughts and really embrace those things, it'll spur on more positive thoughts, because now we're changing the chemistry in our brain in that moment to go a whole different direction.
Absolutely. It's like, again, those patterns, it's like the more times I do things that feel good or feel lighter for myself, the more that reality becomes. And, part of negative feedback loops and negative thoughts is, how do you disrupt those? And it's through simple things like that, or the physical aspect of get on the dirt bike, right? So I love that so much. When you think about mental, because this really goes into like mental performance, right? And mental hygiene skills. And this is a big thing in the military as well right now, of finding ways to optimize our thoughts. And, from your career and from your experiences, what are some things that have, like, whether they're techniques, tools, or concepts that have really inspired, that you have found valuable?
So I definitely like to listen to podcasts. It's not something that I've always done, and I'm not saying that just because that's the the medium that we're speaking to everyone through today. But there's just something nice to see things from different perspectives, and I choose challenging topics that maybe I don't know a lot about, because then I have to actively listen to what's being said, and then I determine, like, even if this person's like somebody famous and they're known for saying these amazing things, I might agree with 80%, but I'll find myself in moments going, they're wrong there.
Yeah.
And it's almost having that self-courage to disagree with someone who's in a position where, well, surely they're right. They have this podcast. They're telling me these things, right? And so I choose the message that I hear based on whether I agree with it, based on all of my experiences in life. But that helps me sharpen my brain. So in terms of techniques, I challenge myself with differing perspectives. Might be reading a book on a topic that maybe I'm slightly interested in, but isn't something that I'm super interested in. And as I get into the topic, I just go, wow, this is really fascinating. Like, I never thought of that before. I didn't realize that aspect of life worked that way. And sometimes it causes me to explore different topics, and I just start, going down these paths of looking at things that maybe I had never considered before in life, and find them fascinating. One that I'll share that wasn't my own, but my wife and I were talking about nature and how things sustain themselves, and so she had decided to buy a book on beekeeping. Something that we're not going to genuinely do. Like, I'm not going to get all dressed up in the garb, and I don't think she is either, right? Like, we don't have the patience for that, but very fascinating. Like, what is the life cycle of these bees? They're so important to our environment. And she became so fascinated by how all of that works in sustaining, the life of these bees and the different categories of beekeepers, and what level, they're doing this beekeeping for. Like, am I just trying to help the environment? Is this a business for me where I can sell the honey, And so we were having this great conversation after she read this book, and I was just like, wow, this is so fascinating. Like, I had no idea that this is how the inner workings of a beehive actually, like, go down every day, And it was just a really exciting concept for me to think about something that, how many Marines are just sitting around, like, reading beekeeping books? Like, I didn't read it, but she told me all about it, so I almost feel like I read it,
Well, it's just, it's part of that enrichment of life. Like, there's so much more, I drive my car almost every day, and people like when you get into the mechanics of the vehicle and all of those things, it's so complex, and there's so many beautiful, fascinating aspects of things that might look mundane. And I think part of that programming is just learning. Like a lot of reason we might judge something or say like we think we know all about it, which actually inhibits, there's a technique in mindfulness. There's these 8 attitudes that John Kabat-Zinn talks about, and one of them being the beginner's mind, and the importance of that. If you believe you already know about things, then you miss out on the present moment. Like you said, you wouldn't hear, because if I believe I already know everything about beekeeping, even because I saw one little thing on it, doesn't like that I would be missing all this depth and this quality experiencing just listening to more about it. So it's that beginner's mind that's so important I think, especially if you are wanting to break out of your programming. I love what you said, like reading and listening to things that you normally maybe wouldn't, or, I think it's important to always listen to both sides and then listen to your body. Like, how does your body respond to different narratives? And then what feels most in alignment with you?
That's a really interesting concept, and I like that one, because so much of what we think we are actually feeling if we're open to it, and not feeling in terms of how does that make me, the sensation that I get emotionally. It's, you can feel like if there's a topic that is not pleasing to you, you'll feel the physical tension as you start
or like
to
your
brace.
breath will get or the things that really resonate, like you'll soften and you'll be like just notice how your body responds. It's so true.
Well, and that's where you get these really interesting conversations that people have, because if you take a look at body language, you can tell so much about what's being discussed. Like, I love sitting and people watching, because I can tell, I'll be like, okay, what kind of conversation are they having right now? And you just watch their body language and you can tell, is it like business? Because there's like a more formal posture and, very formal type greetings where someone, a firm handshake and they're looking each other in the eye, and, like it's not that warm, like, hey, I know this person, or I'm really happy to be having this conversation and I'm really relaxed about it. So it's kind of fascinating to watch that body language, because so much of what we communicate is nonverbal.
Yes. This is a big work when you get into subtle anatomy, and the work that we do with mind-body medicine is the body. The body doesn't lie. The body will, there's a great book called The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. And this goes into how the body holds trauma, and that you can see it. The body doesn't, this is our self-regulating organism, right? And I loved earlier you said something about codes. It made me think about like the holistic perspective of a human. We have the body that, to break it down, you can be like, okay, this is our machine to get us from A to B. And then you have the thoughts which create our electricity. But then you have the codes, which are these programmings, because you can code a machine to do something. And if we're not aware of the codes and the imprints that are put in us, then we might miss out on paying attention to body language, or we might just assume things about something, or we hold ourselves back, or we believe everything we're told, right? The concept of if you stand for nothing, you fall for everything. Well, you just, and this is actually based off of that fawning of like where we abandon ourselves to make everybody comfortable. And that's a program for a lot of people. So it's so fascinating. And, I know, again, going back to your steps and talking about how people can kind of break themselves out of these programmings, is there anything else you want to share and add to that?
I think the biggest thing is, as we take a look at our sleep, our nutrition, our exercise, and a lot of people don't like, thinking about exercise. They think, oh, this means I have to go to a gym or something like that. But how do we go about moving our bodies every day? And every one of these things has such an important place in ensuring that we reduce our stress and that we improve our overall health. So it can't just be one thing. I could be the most amazing specimen of physical fitness, which I'm not. It's a good thing everybody can't see me. But if I were this Adonis-like figure, that doesn't mean I'm healthy. And that's what society would have us believe,
right?
Or this programming, this code. It's how am I healthy in every aspect? So even something as simple as I am choosing intentionally to eat something that I think is bad. But then I also know that in response to that, I'm going to offset with another aspect of my life where I know I can regain some ground, if you will, and achieve this harmony, this balance. So, hey, I don't feel guilty because I made up my mind. My wife made me a phenomenal cheesecake on my birthday. And I think in that moment, I ate like 2 pieces. And normally I don't eat a lot of sweets. And it was completely guilt-free because I was like, it's my birthday. I may not have another day on this earth tomorrow. Just because I had my birthday doesn't mean I'm guaranteed another minute. And I'm going to eat this cheesecake. Now, do I go about doing that every single day? Of course not. It was a special occasion, and I really enjoyed it. I didn't have any guilt about how much cheesecake I ate. But then I went out, and the very next day it was, hey, you know what? Let's get up. Let's go take a walk this morning and go for a little bit longer than we normally might. And it was just kind of like that background offsetting of the cheesecake. And, you know, we could go into an argument about whether, you know, going for an extra mile on a walk offsets, 500 calories of cheesecake or something.
It's the energy, though. I really feel like our mind and attitude, the way we receive things, this is why, like, you can indulge in a family, like, mac and cheese with all the, like, it's homemade recipe and it's so much, like, but you feel good after, and it was so great, and you were so grateful, and it was made with love, versus getting that mac and cheese from a restaurant might make you feel sick. It's really about our attitude of how we receive things. And I think that we can be so hard on ourselves around what we eat. Maybe there's habits or behaviors or things that, like I'm a nail biter by nature, right? And it's like, that's gross, right? But at the end of the day, you can, like, if I judge myself, and every time that because it is a neurological pattern for sure. Trust me, I've gone deep into this, and it's been my whole life of exploring if I can break this habit. I do have my nails done though, so we're working with it. I go through phases. But the whole point is that, that I can judge myself and be like, that's nasty, my hands are ugly, and go into that. Or I could just be like, wow, my body regulates, because I'm, perfectionist by nature. I have these tendencies that, just like everybody has things they're healing, I have my own things I'm healing. And I have compassion of why I have a nail biting tendency and where that comes from. And I have grace with it. And you know what? If I bite my nails, it's just, there's not this weight to it, right? Where a lot of this harsh judgment we have on ourselves, it comes from ourselves. And if we want to, like, I think a great way to begin with it is like witnessing, going back to your example, the concept of being broke. Well, what if you do something that makes you feel good, or what if you renegotiate the story? I know anytime I get sick or I'm going through something, I never use the language that I'm hurt or broke or sick or whatever. I never say those things. I always say I'm healing. The language of which I speak about my experience is a huge piece of how it informs the experience of it and how it manifests. So I'm healing, right? It's just using different language around this. And that's part of debunking those programs. And, going into in the military, when we think about what, it's like there's a very conditioned behavior, and we joke about like the OCD stuff and like the organization. And if you're on time, you're late, there's this programming that happens that when we start to balance this, I can be professional and hold this, and I can have compassion in these ways, right? Like my spouse is not my soldier, right? And just being able to practice that, I call it embodied paradox, where you're holding opposites in a way. That is really a big thing that fosters resilience. And in the military, being able to practice this grace or this recovery element where you're able to still show up for the mission and be responsible, and then have a lightheartedness in this other way. Like you said, that offsetting, like it's the cheesecake and the walk, right? You got to have both in life.
Absolutely. I mean, if we just focus so hard on one thing and we're so uptight about being successful or being perfect, we're actually creating quite the opposite inside ourselves. We're creating so much turmoil where it can become counterproductive. How many times have we seen these highly successful people, or what we perceive to be highly successful in life, and they're absolute disasters. Look at so many movie stars. There's these people that we idolize, and they've seemingly got it all together, except for they go and they have this big hit movie, and then a year later it's like, oh, they're checked into rehab because they're so strung out on drugs, and they look a mess. And I'm not judging them, but I just look at that and I go, there was not balance in their life, and we're idolizing this unhealthy lifestyle, and it's not success. It eats itself apart, and it's just one of those absolute realities that if we do not achieve balance, there will be outward symptoms sooner or later. So how do we get to that point where we maintain that harmony? And it really is letting ourselves have those moments of not that uptight stricture of life where there's the rule breaking in our head that's happening. I mean, like you're talking about chewing your nails, right? Or biting your nails. Is there anyone standing there going like, why are you doing that? That's against the rules. There are no rules. There's no rules here. We're adults. Like I can do anything I want.
Yeah.
Should I do things that are generally good? Yeah, absolutely. But there's no rule about I have to make my bed. And I won't go off on this tangent too far, but I think quite a few people have heard Admiral McRaven spoke at, I guess it was the Naval Academy graduation, and said, all right, all of you brand new, newly commissioned officers, don't ever forget, get up in the morning and you make your bed and you've already accomplished something today. And my wife was joking with me over the weekend, and I hadn't made up like my side of the bed. She's like, I thought Admiral McRaven told you need to make your bed every morning. Like, how are you going to be successful in life? And I was like, there's no rules. And as a matter of fact, it almost makes me feel good because it felt like this is a message that you have to live by, or you cannot be successful, or you will not have achieved anything in life. So there are days when I'll look at the bed and intentionally not make it because I go, I am not defined by whether I made the bed in the morning. Like, is it a total pigsty? No. Like, I just didn't make it all nice and neat and everything. And I go, you know what? I'm still successful today. I'm just going to go out and find out what that success is. And then when it happens throughout the day, I'm like, so yeah, there it is. Like, there's some results that I delivered because I have that knowledge of myself. I'm in tune with myself, and I know I'm not defined by whether I made the bed in the morning.
So big. It's so important. And I want to say it louder for those in the back, because this is so big when you start to take that self-reflection of, okay, wait, that's where I heard it from, or that's where it comes from. And then you start to orchestrate your life from your own agency, that you don't have to, I want to have pretty hands, but wait a second. Why? Oh, because society told me that, having pretty hands means this. And, it's so silly, but it's these little small things. And I love, one thing I love about this podcast is the openness and the realness and the vulnerability, where we can be honest that as people, we have weird little ticks that we judge ourselves on that isn't a big deal, but it is a big deal because it bugs us and it distracts us, and then we're hard on ourselves about things. And so learning to take that weight off and renegotiate why, and this is the whole foundation of this self-awareness, is learning self-literacy. Where did I first learn this, and why do I believe this? And I think this is a really big piece for leadership. I'm sure this is something that people utilize, or to be a leader, you have to have that self-reflection and be able to stay true to your convictions, which convictions come from within.
They absolutely do. And I think the question of why and the way we ask it is how we truly find answers. And some people might be like, that sounded really weird right now, because of course, why is you're asking a question and therefore you should have an answer, right? But I think it speaks to the bigger point of what we've been talking about. I'm feeling a certain way, like this was bad. Whatever action I took was bad because of the programming, because of the code. And when I feel that negative response and I'm feeling guilty, or somebody's looking over my shoulder judging me, and I go, why do I feel that way? It's the full question that includes why. And when the answer is because I've been told this a million times is bad, why? okay, yeah, it's bad to walk across the street when there's traffic coming. I might get run over, right? Like I've been told that a million times by society. Probably not a good idea. But why shouldn't I wear this shirt today?
Right.
Well, because it might be cold out and I'm putting on a short sleeve shirt. Who cares?
Or like in 5th grade, someone made fun of this color on me, right? Like it's
Exactly.
it's like, where do these things come from? Wow, this has been so amazing. Before we close, is there any gems of wisdom or advice that you want to share with any of our military community or families listening to this?
Definitely. I think, there's a ton of resources today that are underutilized. There's a lot of great aspects that we should be open to exploring when it comes to anything from transitioning out of the military, life after the military, after we've transitioned, and just being open to the variety of resources that are out there, things like this podcast. One of the things that I participate in, and I promise this isn't meant to be a gratuitous plug, but American Corporate Partners. I do a lot of mentoring for transitioning service members, and it's a partnership set up between this nonprofit company and Fortune 500, in most cases, businesses in America that bring that corporate knowledge to transitioning service members. Because it's one thing to go through our transition classes that are mandated and structured from within the military. It's another to see what other resources are out there and explore what they can provide us. And it's just a great opportunity when you can connect with people that are truly experts in their field rather than the message that we've created just within the military. And it's only one-sided, right? And it's a great message, and I love the transition programs that we have now. But there's so much more out there. So the idea would be, I don't know that it's a great gem of wisdom, but look around and see what other resources are out there. And simply finding resources for veterans and their family members is something that I think we should all do more of. It's not a handout or something along those lines. It doesn't make us weak to seek out assistance. I mean, if I have like an ailment, where am I going to go? I'm going to go to a practitioner that is specialized in medicine to help fix my body. Well, I'm embarking on a new lifestyle that includes a new career. Where would I go to find information about that? So there's resources like that out there where people give their time freely, voluntarily, because they truly care about other people. And that's one of the reasons I do it, is because I know how daunting it can be transitioning, and how there can be kind of that stigma of, oh, well, I don't want to just go to the transition office on base. Like, what are they really going to tell me, right? Okay, so where are the professionals out in the world? People like me that have been through it and are now successful in their chosen profession. They're a great resource to go contact and get further information about what life outside of the military looks like, or in a new career.
Thank you so much for sharing that. It is such a need to, because I think that it can be daunting for people to try to find these resources, but thank you for sharing that. And thank you for sharing all your wisdom and, this whole conversation of thinking about our thoughts, talking about our thinking and our thoughts. It's so wild, because it just really shows how dynamic the human experience is. So thank you for sharing everything. Please be sure to share and subscribe to Operation Within. If you found some pieces of this episode really helpful for you, please share it with your friends and help us get the word out so we can continue to support you in this operation of wellness.